All right. Session today is Iowa Now. We're using Iowa Now as a case study about leveraging Drupal beyond web pages. My name is Josh Kane. I'm a senior application developer here at the University of Iowa. I work in the Office of Communications and Marketing, which is under the Vice President for Strategic Communication. I'm his pet web developer. Actually, our new Vice President is starting at the end of the month, so hopefully I'll continue to be that Vice President's pet web developer. I do not work in ITS, in our information technology. I work with them, so there's a lot of collaborative effort, and around Drupal it's been especially collaborative. Sometimes our projects will start behind theirs, and in the process we'll leapfrog and be able to feed stuff back. So the open source nature of Drupal actually lends itself to a pretty good community feeling here at the university. For those of you who've worked at universities or worked with software, you know that's not always the case. So today, in terms of agenda, we'll do a brief overview of Iowa Now, talk a little bit about what it is, where it fits in the university's communication strategy, some of the numbers on it. And then what I want to do is run down through these different technologies that we've built or intend to build out from Iowa Now using Drupal as the base. So RSS feeds, custom data feeds. We'll give some examples of how we're actually using this real-world digital signage, automated email, Google News, YouTube. Talk about Facebook and Twitter, talk about Pintrist and Tumblr, and not talk about mobile, which we'll get to. So that's sort of where we're going here, and then take questions at the end. So before I get in, I want to use two quotes that sort of frame this presentation and how we're focusing it. This presentation is a bit of show and tell, but it's framed around these two ideas. Initially, about 3 years ago, when we started to look at Drupal on campus, Mark Ahrens, who's also a senior developer here, some of you may have seen his presentation on mobile. He was spearheading the Drupal effort. He was getting us started on it. And I asked him this question. I said, all right, there's always the latest and greatest with web development. You know, it was this, it was this, it was this. We're going to put everything in Drupal. What's the advantage? What are we looking at when we come down, you know, next time? And what he said is, once you have your content in a database, it becomes data that can be replicated or moved as needed. And the idea being, in that specific question, his idea was, if we put it in Drupal, we're putting it in a database. If something better than Drupal comes, it's going to be a lot easier to migrate that than from old flat files. And then in 2011, I went to DrupalCorn Chicago, and this was a quote from Dres in his keynote. He really spent a lot of time on this particular phrase. He said the future, and I think he meant the future for Drupal, is being anywhere at any time, reaching any information or people needed at any time. And he went through that in a lot of detail, a lot of pieces. And the gist of it was, though, that, and I think this has been talked about here with Drupal 8, is that Drupal 8 is not going to be just about web pages. It's going to be about feeding data in all these different directions. So when it came to Iowa Now, we knew this was coming. We knew we were going to this situation, and we started building with Drupal 7 to see how far we could get along these lines and see what that did for us. And the actual shape of the project has this idea underlying it, and we've actually had surprising success. It does make me really happy to see how much in Drupal 8 is going to be out of the box compared to all the hacking and cracking we had to do to get it to work here. So that's sort of the framework for this presentation. So Iowa Now, this is from our About page. It's your official one-stop source for University of Iowa news, offering information and insights from people and programs throughout our university. I'm going to bop us over here. This is the Iowa Now homepage. So it looks a little bit like a newspaper. PR stories, various pieces. In the summer, if you work at a university, not everything goes on. So we actually have our writers, when they're going on vacation, they take a camera and they do a little piece about it, sort of expanding the view of what you can do at the University of Iowa sometimes when you're not in classes. So we just ran our numbers for FY 2013. We had 2,100 story nodes, and this includes videos, photo galleries, various pieces, and that was 1.5 million page views, and that is from Google Analytics. So that's not hits, that's actual page views. We actually even keep our subnet, where we do a lot of our content work, out of that tracking. So this is a pretty good number of the public traffic we're getting. We have about 25 editors who enter stories. Some are in there on on a daily, if not minute-by-minute basis. Others will put in a story once a week. But we have a lot of different roles. The back end is actually, in some ways, more complex than the front end for this system. So. Any questions about Iowa Now? Any questions before we go on? All right, so RSS feeds. We started with the RSS feeds that come built into the Drupal core taxonomy. If you're doing a small blogger site, those work great. We very quickly ran into a lot of issues. So what I'd say is, if you're going to use views and your site is going to use taxonomy, there's a view that gets installed but not activated by default when you install views. And it replaces the taxonomy. It's far more robust. You can do a lot more stuff with it. Once we switched to that, a lot of our problems went away. So the first tip from this presentation is, if you're going to be doing RSS feeds, and if you're doing Drupal and you don't have views installed, install views, turn it on. It'd make your life a lot happier. You can go pretty much, you can do a lot with that from that point. RSS, though, for those of you might not be familiar, it's a subset of XML. And it's very limited and very specific in terms of what content goes where. And we quickly found that for a lot of our extension uses, when we're pushing data out from Iowa Now, the RSS format was too restrictive. So we started developing custom data feeds. And for that, we use the Views Datasource module. It generates XML, JSON, RDF, and maybe a couple of others. We focused on XML and JSON feeds. It's a great module. If you're using views and you have data you want to push out, it pretty much snaps in. It's not perfect, though. We had a couple things we had to work around. One is that HTML entities aren't always correctly converted to XML, and that will cause malformed XML, which causes, basically per the XML specifications, if your XML is malformed, the entire file gets ignored. So there's a fix here for this, and these slides will be up later. We use a lot of HTML entities that maybe aren't quite as standard, and they just weren't being escaped to XML quickly. There's arrays that are already built into the data source module. We just had to add the matching pieces to do that conversion. My understanding from Drupal, from what I'm reading about Drupal 8, is that all of this stuff we're doing here gets built into core, and from the get-go, you'll be able to just start exporting XML. It's supposed to be, it's vaporware yet, we're fingers crossed, but I think it's going to be a lot easier to do this. If you need to do data feeds in XML out of Drupal 7, highly recommend doing this, because we didn't realize the problem until we actually had live data feeds, and I get calls from people, webmasters at other sites going, hey, we haven't gotten any updates from you. Hi, Brandon. Brandon used to call me about this. And we'd be like, oh, it would just shut off. There were no warnings from the inside of Drupal. Once we fixed this, I don't think we've had any since then, have we? Oh. The second thing we ran into was we do a lot of pasting from Microsoft Word, and we were getting malformed XML. We used WYSIWYG with CK Editor. We had span tags that were floating in there, and for some reason, WYSIWYG and CK Editor weren't positioning them correctly when they were pasted from Word. And again, it looked fine when you looked at it in a web page, but in the XML file, those spans being slightly out of place and out of the hierarchy caused the entire file to drop off. Worked with this for a while, and the eventual solution we ended up with was we just strip all span tags out of our body. On the one hand, that limits the HTML that you can use. On the other hand, it actually made our pages appear more consistent, because we were forcing folks to use preset classes. Spans, you can toss them in and get around that pretty easily. By taking them out, it had an advantage. If you're in a situation where you need span tags to make your HTML work, and you really have to have that, good luck. That was as far as I got with the solution. If you do find another solution, please post it, because I'd love to implement it. Any questions about data feeds? All right. So let's do some examples. And I'm going to start with the most basic. XML and this sort of exchange was designed to exchange information primarily between websites. So I'm going to show a couple here. This is the home page. This is actually Brandon Neal's work. Is that right? Yeah. So this news section is driven straight from Iowa Now. Brandon, you want to say anything about this, other than I did a great job supporting you?
Yeah, no, the client wanted
So they pull in everything from that's got a research tag in Iowa Now, and then they can select which ones they want to have appear here.
I think that's
Very cool.
actually, I think they all get added.
They can delete them. It's even better. So how many of you are familiar with the Feeds module? The Views Datasource and the Feeds module work really well together. They play pretty well. From my experience, did you have any troubles with them? So, Brandon and I went back and forth on the phone for months as we got this worked out. So if I refer to him, it's not just because he's cool, but he actually knows stuff I probably don't know about this. So I'm going to bop over to the Alumni Association. Down here, they actually have a roller. Same sort of thing, except in our taxonomy in Iowa Now, we have a very robust taxonomy. It covers all the colleges as well as key topics. So we're just feeding them the latest news that's tagged for alumni, and I think they rotate this in, possibly even just with JavaScript. So, and there are other examples. What I find is interesting is sometimes someone will start using an RSS feed because we just make those publicly available, and I find out later after the RSS feed isn't working for them that they've had it up for months. So we know Office of the Provost, Writing University, Office of the Chief Diversity Officer, there are probably more. Brandon, I'm going to pick on you again. I was going to do this anyway, even if you weren't here. Brandon had the suggestion of using views arguments to create sort of a mini API web service so that basically allowing people to put in taxonomy terms to be able to get a customized data feed so that I wouldn't have to provide one to them each time. I think that's a great idea. I just haven't had time to do it. But if you look at views and you look at views data source, that's actually a natural extension that I kick myself for not having thought of on my own. So that's one of those projects that is be like, yeah, that'd be great to do. I'm not going to do it anytime soon, sort of thing. But it is a good example of, again, once you start to step away from web pages and you start to think about the data, that suddenly becomes a very natural extension, something you can do. All right, so that's the basics. Next one is digital signage. This is a screen capture from the digital signage at our College of Business, and we worked with them to provide them a custom feed. This is driven from the UI events section in Iowa Now. I'm going to bop over here and show you that. This content down in here, we have featured, and then we have these here, and you can see we've got quite a bit of content. So we give them a data feed of that, and it appears on this right here. I believe that this QR code takes you straight to Iowa Now. Over here on the other side, UI News, same sort of thing. It takes to our top stories. So that's feeding out of Drupal via XML and then being brought into a digital signage solution. For those of you who are interested in digital signage, the presentation after this is Mark Bennett talking about what he's done using Drupal to actually provide signage for College of Liberal Arts and Sciences here. I'm actually going to sit in on that one because I know he's doing it. I don't know how. So. No, we have like 3 different signage systems.
This is for when there's Scala out there.
And then we have multiple Visix installs as well. So.
Could it be done, like, could that information downstairs be done through Drupal and just hasn't been done yet, or are there special things that are being done with those signs, things like that?
It depends on who you talk to. Some people will say Drupal can do anything. Some people say, well, we need to be able to provide cable feeds, DirecTV in there, and we can figure that out. No. So I'd say the answer is probably 40% technical, 60% political. Would you? I know that the IMU system is on ITS's Visix, so it might be tied into their ERD. I don't know. So, ooh, ERD acronym, yay! Sorry, somebody got to yell bingo at some point. I was surprised from our end in Iowa Now. This took 45 minutes of my time. Most of that was reading email and getting it proofed, but we did it in a day and a half. It was just like, hey, we want to add this page in here. Okay, boom, good. Fortunately, this XML never crashed. So. All right, so the next one is automated email engine. And this solution is not entirely in Drupal. I'm going to bop over here. Let's pull this up. So this is our subscription options. We don't tie it to Hawk ID because, or any sort of direct authentication. We leave it open, and that's because this is primarily oriented towards the public. You can sign up for basic email, but then you can sign up for custom emails. So this is our topic taxonomy. So you can sign up for any combination of these, and we have 3 different settings. You can get news alerts. So as soon as it publishes in Drupal, as soon as it publishes in Iowa Now, there's a listener that will notice that on a data feed, pull it in, and if you've subscribed to something that uses that taxonomy that's a news alert, it'll ship it out to you. And we're looking at maybe a max 5-minute latency between the time we publish and the time it starts going out as email. Daily is an aggregation for that day based upon the topics that you select. Weekly is the same thing. We weren't able to accomplish all of this using Drupal. We did try. We needed that flexibility because we're serving both the public and the media, so we needed that instantaneous email, but we also needed the nightly and weekly. The thing, though, the reason I wanted to include it in here is that we drive that email engine off of Drupal and off of the data feeds out of it. It provides our taxonomy, it provides the publication, it tells us when it's published, provides the content. It just goes. And so, in a sense, being able to provide data, you can provide it to another web service out of Drupal and still accomplish quite a bit. I was able to write the entire automated engine to get from concept to publication in, I think it was 40-some hours of programming time. It was very fast. But the reason I was able to do it that quickly was because so much of the intelligence was stored in Drupal and was being exported along with the data. This is what you see when you get a news alert. These are all the ones that you're subscribed to. Usually this is 3 or 4 because I'm admin. I have to get everything. So this is a little bit shorter. But you can see it just gives you the headline, published date, links. This is actually an interesting piece because we do our own stories in Iowa Now, but we also will embed stories about the university, usually positive stories. So this is KGAN, which is a local news affiliate up in Cedar Rapids. They did a story about our macular degeneration, and we embed that in Iowa Now, and we provide that just as an encapsulated piece. These links right here don't take you to Iowa Now. They take you directly to that story. It's just another way of a vehicle for getting information out about the university. We want to present a full picture of the university as long as it's good news. So encapsulating and distributing other people's content through this, it's another expansion beyond what you'd think Drupal would normally do. So, any questions about any of this?
And then what kind of tool are you using for your distribution of the email? That's a separate channel?
I actually built it in Cold Fusion.
Oh.
We do the templates by hand, and we use our on-campus mailing system. We just had to throttle it back, so we wrote some throttle engines in there and whatnot.
So custom.
Yeah, complete homebrew. We spent about, I'd say about 14 months looking at different solutions, MailChimp, things that would integrate with Drupal, and then we just pulled the trigger and did this, thinking if we got to a point later on where something evolved, we could switch it back. So, any other questions about this one? Google News. Do any of you use Google News? It's a sort of aggregator. Complicated. In the news world, in the PR world, getting your content into Google News is a big deal. We actually just use the Google News sitemap module. It provides, it encapsulates your information into a format that Google wants. They can read it like that. Easiest part was tweaking the module. We had some non-standard uses, like our publication date is separate from our node creation date, and the Google News sitemap module took creation date as publication date. We switched that around. Easy things to do in there. It's a very small module. The hardest part was convincing Google to include us in Google News. That took all summer. You'd send them an email, and you'd hear back in 2 weeks, and their response would be, no, and if you contact us anytime in the next 6 weeks, we're going to ignore you. And I thought, you're not going to ignore me, and then they did. But again, I think it's about a 5 to 7 minute latency between the time we publish a story and the time that it hits Google News. We've actually had situations where that was too quick. Somebody published something early. It was an embargoed story with grant contracts, and we're trying to get it back. We ended up having to publish on the node story, sorry, we published this early. We know it's in Google News and you're coming here to read it. Come back at 6 o'clock when we can legally, provide it to you, sort of stuff. That was a fun day. Before I had children, when things like this would happen at work, I'd be like, "Argh!" Now I have children, I'm like, oh, we'll get over it. I go back to my office and giggle. I'm like, if that's the worst thing that happens, so. Any questions about Google News?
That was the,
Oh,
it looks like the NSA or something, right?
Homeland Security.
There you go, yeah, that is kind of the worst thing that can happen, isn't it?
Well-
Sorry, I'm just saying, I think you're right.
We'll talk later. Yes, if Homeland Security called me about one of my children, that would be bad. I did have a coworker who that happened to. It's an interesting story about Afghanistan, but that was out in Oregon.
What's your blog site?
No. So YouTube. We've only partially implemented our integration of Iowa Now on YouTube. What we have is we just restricted it so that any video that's placed in Iowa Now, you can place them as a primary image feature. Let me show you that right here. So you can see right here, we put them in line. This is done with the media module, and we use media module 1 as a beta. Had to hack it to get it to work, but we had a deadline. So we do them here, but we can also place them in line in the body. But any video that's going to appear in Iowa Now has to be on YouTube, and our preference is that it's also going to be hooked up in the university's YouTube channel. Right now, we have to kind of depend on people to do that independently. We're working on specifications to sync our Iowa Now taxonomy and content with our YouTube content, with our YouTube channel. The technology for this is pretty straightforward. The business process and the turf and getting everybody on board so it works together is what's tricky. My eventual ideal is that any video that we place in Iowa Now needs to be on YouTube and in our YouTube channel, and it needs to have in the teaser for that video at the bottom, the comment section or whatever, can't remember what term they use, it has a link back to Iowa Now and vice versa. What I would eventually like to have happen is that any video that's featured in our YouTube University channel is also in Iowa Now, that they are cross-pollinated, they're cross-tagged with that. Interesting enough, there is the technology within Drupal that you can upload a video to Drupal and it will pass it through to YouTube and put all that information there. And when you look at the extra fields that come with media and entity and file now, that becomes a real possibility that your interface for uploading your videos to YouTube is Drupal, and that you can maintain and extend your taxonomy and keep everything in sync that way. I give myself probably about a 40% chance of having this actually accomplished in this fiscal year. Not because of the technology, but because it takes a lot of work to get a university this size, to get everyone's head around, yeah, we want this in one place, we want to do it this way, we want to do it together. So, any questions about that? Facebook and Twitter, not automated. Who'd have thought in a presentation about this? There are tools that allow you to post to Facebook, post to Twitter straight from Drupal. We looked at those. But we have a social media director. It's a fairly new position. And he said no, he didn't want to do that. And I went, you don't want to do that? And he said no. And once we got to understand what he wanted to be able to do was to be selective about the stories. He also wanted to be able to tune the headlines and how we present them. Also, he had some stuff he wanted to do with timing. So this piece, and I find this fascinating because we talk about social media and we talk about Drupal, we actually had a business case that caused us to decouple them. So I think we only publish 1 or 2 key stories to Facebook each day. And when we post a story to Twitter, it's less important that it's coming from the University of Iowa's Twitter feed. What's more important is the hashtag we use it with. So when we had some, here's an easy example. There were these mammoth bones that were found, I think, in central Iowa. When we posted a story about that, because they were brought here for analysis, the key thing we had to work with was we had to shorten the title for Twitter enough that we could put the hashtag paleontology in it, because that entered it into the social media discussion at a far greater level of interest than if we'd had it just coming on our feed from Iowa, from the University of Iowa. We got into the paleontology discussion and it got retweeted quite a bit. So that's an interesting perspective when you're talking about expanding Drupal. Depending on your business practice, you can automate your connections, but sometimes you don't want to. I figured you got not automated exclamation point. That's a pretty good slide for a Drupal camp. At least unusual. Pinterest and Tumblr. On the books, not yet implemented, but I want to talk about it because as we're looking at the maturing of the media module, you're looking what you can do with that and all the embedding. Once you put an image in, you can add in extra fields that are specific to Pinterest. So you can have the image as it exists in your Drupal site, but maybe you want the content to be tweaked, adjusted, fitted to meet the Pinterest audience in social media. What I'd like to do is have most, if not all, of the photos that go into our galleries get posted to Pinterest with a nice caption. Imagine we have, say, Dance Gala, which is a dance performance that's done with students. Some of the photos that come out of that are just exceptional. That'd be great to have out in Pinterest. The dance community in Pinterest is quite sizable. Getting that with the right captioning, the right attribution, all that stuff done, and having it automatically go up, that's where I'd like to go. Maybe Tumblr, although what seems to be happening with Tumblr these days, they seem to be in flux in some ways, so I don't know if we're going to do that. But Pinterest, how many of you are familiar with Pinterest? How many of you have seen the demographics on Pinterest? It is, at least last time I checked, which was a few months ago, it is predominantly a gendered female environment. And so keeping that in mind and making certain that A, we're reaching out as a university, but how we reach out and how we bracket it is a really interesting concept. It puts the social back in social media for our shop, which is really about communications and marketing, and thinking about, now that Drupal gives you the technology to hook these different pieces up so well, because the tech is so easy, it gives you an opportunity to really think about your audience and how these different streams are different, still coming from a central source. Any questions about that?
I have a question back on Facebook and Twitter.
Go for it.
So you're not automating it. How are you posting to Facebook and Twitter? Is it somebody manually doing it? Or?
And that was a business decision. Since we're not doing everything, we have basically one person who I'd say about 60% of his job is to monitor the university's top-level social media presence and keep that in balance. So here's an example. When President Obama came and gave a healthcare speech on campus, our Facebook wall just blew up with people from around the state saying, how can the University of Iowa support this? I mean, it was it was bad enough that one, we had to actually forward to the Secret Service to say, we don't know, this is beyond our call. I mean, it was just this intense amount of vitriol coming. And the answer that we came up with that we very carefully responded was, if the president called you and said, I want to come give a speech at your house, would you tell him no? You know, he was coming in an official capacity, and so we balanced at that. But we actually had more than one person monitoring these channels and responding very carefully to it. So we have somebody who that's their specialty, and it's been a great privilege to work with somebody they're not focused on the technology. They're not coming to social media from the technology side. They're coming from the business side, from the marketing side, from the communication strategy, and seeing how those two meet, where I come to him and I'll say, hey, there's this new module, it can do this, and he's like, yeah, you would just alienate your audience if you did that. I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go back to my desk. And so I'm like, my enthusiasm, but then like 5 minutes later, I'm like, wow, he just saved me from making an ass out of myself online. Woo! So if you ever have the opportunity to talk with someone about a social media expert, somebody who really focuses on that, about your social media strategy, don't be surprised if they say, no, don't automate it. You need to reach on a personal basis. So I would never have expected that when I first started working. I'd come to him and be like, we could post everything. He's like, yeah, I don't. So any other questions? Anything about Pinterest and Tumblr? All right, mobile. This is a bit of a mea culpa. We are completely behind the curve with mobile in Iowa now. How many of you were able to attend Mark Aaron's session on using Drupal as a mobile backend? What he said is what we should be doing. We know that. It's just a resource issue. We haven't gotten there. It's resource, politics, various things. we have two plans. We're going to go with a responsive site on our responsive design on our next redesign. Brandon, we're actually waiting till you guys do the homepage. We're letting you break that ground for us. So, and then we did some work initially having data feeds that would feed to the university's mobile app. I don't know if those ever got utilized. We never finished tuning them. So they might be in the mobile app for all I know, but that's one other place where we're looking to push Iowa Now information. We fully recognize that we've got this great set of data and we're missing a huge population of people and devices because we're not ready. There's enough talk about this here that if that's an interest, you can combine this presentation with that presentation and you get kind of a fuller picture of what you could do. So, any questions about that? Mostly I'll say I don't know, talk to Mark. So, going once, going twice. So that's it. That's what I've got to show. I'll take questions. Also, if you have any questions over time, feel free to contact me. Hey, half hour, not bad. Going once. Thank you.